Hello everyone, welcome back to the Anatomy Lab. Today we're going to be taking a look at the integumentary system, otherwise known as the skin. And the skin is actually a little bit more complex than a lot of people think. There are different types of tissues such as muscle, connective, epithelial, as well as nervous tissue. So we could find a lot of different structures in the skin. So let's get started by taking a look at this model. So all of this is the skin. It's a lot closer up than what you're probably used to, but this is also the inside of your skin. Now, first, when you look at the skin, something that you want to look for are its three major layers. So first of all, the superficial most layer out here, this is called the epidermis. So epi for on top of, dermis on top of the skin, this is the epidermis. Deep to that, after this point, after this gray part, this is now the dermis. And the dermis is going to continue to include all of this stuff inside of here. This is the majority, or like the most complex layer, the dermis. And as you can see, you have a whole lot of stuff in here. But lastly, the deepest layer, which is a little bit, has a bit of a transition to it, but at the very least, definitely down here, this is what's called hypodermis. Sometimes it's otherwise known as the subcutaneous layer. This is underneath all of the dermis, which is going to be with the majority of the active tissues. So you had epidermis, dermis itself, and then hypodermis, the deepest layer. Now, when you look at the epidermis, you can actually see some specific parts to it though. So up here, this as a whole is the epidermis. But the epidermis has a few layers, 5 layers in fact, 5 strata more specifically. But in this case, you can only see 2 of them relatively clearly. So this one up here, this is called the stratum corneum, or the corneal layer. This is the superficial most layer. This is the one with all of the dead skin cells at the top, which is going to be helping to provide a protective layer for the body. Deep to that, you'll have 4 more deeper layers, actually sometimes 3 depending on where you're looking. But all of this is also still epidermis. But at the very bottom, down here, that's where you're going to have a single layer of cells that is going to be going along this kind of bumpy road. This is called the stratum basale, otherwise known as the basal layer. So the stratum basale, that's going to be all the way down here, a single layer of cells at the very bottom of the epidermis. Now, once you've gotten down to the bottom of the epidermis, that's where the dermis starts. But one more thing that you can see here between the dermis and the epidermis is that you have these bumps. These bumps are called dermal papillae. So dermal is referring to dermis, papillae is referring to bumps. So we will learn about bumps a couple times throughout the semester, but this is our first introduction to them, dermal papillae, the bumps at the top of the dermis. Now in the dermis, you can also see a variety of structures, including muscles, glands, and so on, but let's take a look at what we have here. So first of all, you may recognize these long kind of structures that protrude out of the skin. These are hairs, but hairs have parts as well. So if you look closely, inside of this hair, you can see that there are different parts. So this portion that the hair is inside of, this kind of encapsulating part on the outside, this is called the hair follicle. This is going to be holding the hair as well as allowing the hair to grow effectively. But at the bottom of the hair, deep, like in the skin itself, this is called the hair root. But once you start to leave the skin all the way up here to the outside of the body, however long the hair might be, that's called the hair shaft. So hair follicle, hair root, hair shaft. Now, when you're looking at the hair, though, you also want to try and associate a couple of structures that you'll often see connected to them. So you can see right here, at the very least on this model, that you can see this kind of fibrous red structure, as well as this structure that's kind of hanging out on the side of the hair. So first of all, this right here, this is a gland. This and this is actually the same thing. These are kind of oily glands called sebaceous glands. They're going to be secreting a substance called sebum onto the hair so that the hair becomes moistened, softened, as well as a bit waterproof. So oily substance, this is going to be the sebaceous gland, which secretes its sebum onto the hair. Now, the other thing that is attached to the hair are these, the red kind of fibrous structures. These are called erector pili muscles. So these are going to be helping to pick up the hairs. And try to think to yourself, do you know what it's called when your hairs stand up? These are what's causing the goosebumps. So erector pili muscle pulls on the hairs and then it causes them to stand up so that you have goosebumps. So connected or associated with the hair, you have the sebaceous gland as well as the erector pili muscle. Now, moving away from like the hair follicle, you can also see that you have another gland here. This kind of like volleyball looking thing, as well as this that's been cut. These two are another type of gland, which is a sweat gland. These are called eccrine sweat glands. So eccrine sweat glands, they are going to be smaller. They are also going to not be attached to the hair follicle. And you can see that you have this long tube going up to the skin so that it could release its watery substance onto the body. Now, probably the hardest part of looking at the skin is differentiating between the different types of nervous tissue. So the nervous tissue that are kind of like what's in your skin for feeling and touch, that's what we're going to look at here. But we have different types of feeling, so for that we have different types of receptors. So over here, starting in the dermal papilla, you can see you have these superficial kind of bulbous structures. These superficial bulbous structures are called Meissner's corpuscles. So Meissner's corpuscles are the ones that are in the dermal papillae. They're smaller and they're more superficial. These are going to be allowing for light touch, while deep touch is going to be due to a larger, deeper corpuscle instead. That is this down here. So generally in the hypodermis, but also to an extent in the dermis sometimes, this is called a Pacinian corpuscle. So Meissner's corpuscles are more superficial and smaller in the dermal papillae. Pacinian corpuscle is deeper and larger, and this is going to be allowing for deep pressure. Now, if you look closely, you can also see that there are smaller, yellow, kind of fibrous looking structures that go and branch out. These are different types of nerves as well. So over here, you can see that they go out into the epidermis, but sometimes they also stay along like the dermal or the stratum basale. This with the little pointed ends versus this with the little circular ends are different. So the ones without anything that look just like points, these are free nerve endings. So free nerve endings of the epidermis in this case. While this one, you can see that they have little kind of circular discs. These are called Merkel's discs. So Merkel's discs at the top with the little kind of buttons or with the little circles or discs at the top. Now you don't only see free nerve endings in the epidermis though. Like you can feel through your hairs as well. You have free nerve endings of the hair follicle too. Now lastly, something else that you can see is the type of tissue or the change in tissue that is in the hypodermis. This, or all of these little yellow bubbles, these are adipose tissue. Adipose tissue, which is otherwise known as fat. So this is going to be helping to insulate the body as well as support the skin, and this is just resting right underneath the dermis. Alrighty, so we'll be taking a look at the skin again a little bit later, but I think that's about it for this video. So good luck with your studying. Make sure that you look at your structure lists, and I'll talk to you all again soon.